Welcome to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. Industry updates and best practice to promote, support, develop and protect the Scottish red meat sector.
Hello and thank you very much for choosing to listen to this. I'm Mark Stephen. An old friend of mine who's a dairy farmer was outraged at all the talk during COP26 about cows belching methane and supposedly destroying the planet. What would you rather be locked in a garage overnight with, she asked, your car with the engine running or a farting cow? Now, I know it's not very scientific, but it makes a point of sorts. Reducing global emissions of greenhouse gases was the whole point of COP26, and cows, any ruminants, as a matter of fact, produce methane. Scottish farmers are undoubtedly going to be asked to address that fact, so the question really is, how? Two people join me for this podcast. Caroline Duthie leads SRUC's Beef and Sheep Research Centre. Her research has largely focused on ruminant production systems and most recently on the development and application of precision livestock farming solutions for the monitoring of individual animal productivity, health and welfare. Robert Ramsey is an agricultural consultant who works for SAC Consulting and Air. He's got a specialist interest in beef production systems and business management. Away from work, Robert runs the family farm in partnership with his mum and dad, where they run 40 suckler cows and 300 breeding ewes. Thank you both for joining me.
Good afternoon, Mark.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to have you, Robert, again. What is this, third time now?
It is the third time, yep, third time lucky.
You'll be getting a frequent flyer badge. I'm going to start with you, Carol. Do we have an accurate figure for how much farming contributes to the UK's overall greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, if we look at agriculture, it accounts for about 10% of total UK greenhouse gas emissions. And if we look at enteric methane alone, so through cattle, that's 47%, so quite significant.
That's quite a high figure. That surprises me.
It is.
So it's roughly, 5% of the overall greenhouse gas emissions in the UK come from cattle?
Indeed.
Okay. Now, I'm aware of the fact that research has been going on for some time now, looking at reducing those emissions. How's that been going on? Can you give me an overview?
Yeah, no, it's been going really well. So I've been involved in our Beef and Sheep Research Centre now for about 10 years. Time flies. We've been doing quite a lot of work around methane. I have to say that's been one of our key focuses for all of those 10 years. I guess the research falls into a few key categories for me. So we've been focused on how we can manipulate the animal's diet, for example, through the use of feed additives to reduce methane production. We've been looking at things like breeding for low methane, breeding for high feed efficiency. We've been looking at how we can understand the rumen microbiome, so all the bugs that make up that animal's rumen that digests feed, and how that relates to methane and how that relates to animal performance. One of the areas I've been more actively involved in, I have to say, is developing technologies. So how we can work with technology companies to develop on-farm systems that farmers can use to optimize efficiency of their business, but also reduce their overall carbon footprint. And I guess also we've been looking at proxy measurements. So how can we develop systems that allow us to measure methane emissions in a more commercial farming system?
Robert, how much of that research has been put into practice?
It's a really exciting time really for farmers. It's probably a worrying time for individual farmers as well. Things are changing. We've asked for change for many years, all the years I've been working and farming at home. We've been saying that, this is unsustainable. Things have to change. Now we've got change and we don't necessarily all like it. The face of Scottish farming is different this year to what it was last year. And it's undoubtedly in 5 years' time, it's going to be very different to what it is just now. And with that, I think the pace of change when it comes to technology is really pretty vast, pretty rapid at the moment. And certainly I'm seeing a lot of farms really engaging and really getting involved with technology and particularly in the cattle context, looking at EID, individual weighing, individual monitoring of animals. And the big thing with that is these things are driven, they've got a huge carbon gain. There's a huge saving we can make in terms of the environment, but there's also a huge financial gain. We can if we can save on inputs, we can reduce methane emissions and also put more money in the bank. So for me, it's the double-edged sword, and I certainly, when talking to farmers, would focus more on the financial end than I would on the carbon end. It's an easier sell. We're all quite tight, and it's always easier to save money than save carbon.
It's great saving money, but sometimes to do that, you have to invest money in the first place in new technologies. Not everybody's keen to do that.
Technology tends to get cheaper as it evolves. And you look at your own PC, you spent thousands of pounds on a PC maybe 20 years ago, and now you've got way more power and way more output from your phone. Things have changed. But the other thing we've had was the Sustainable Agricultural Capital Grant Scheme. So Scottish Government put a lot of money into that grant scheme and did encourage a lot of people to take that first step into technology. And generally, once you make a start and once you see the positive gains you get from it, the more willing you are to embrace the next change and bolt something else onto that system to push things forward. First and foremost, we need to research and make sure you're investing in the right thing. But once we know that, there's definitely loads of systems out there that can be really beneficial at a farm level.
That's always a problem, though, because you'll get people who are sort of bold and courageous, Caroline, and they're early adopters. They'll jump. Other folk will be sitting there saying, no, I want this to be a mature technology by the time I actually invest my money in it. And they wait. The trouble is you can wait for a long time.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And that's always going to be one of the key difficulties. But I guess our job, and I guess my job as well as Robert's job, really is to demonstrate the benefits that we can achieve through adoption of technology, both in terms of the economics, but I see a bit of a trend with farmers. They're starting to get much more interested in how technology or new solutions can really benefit them in terms of reducing their carbon footprint.
So if the object of the exercise is to reduce emissions and to make the businesses more efficient, how can precision agricultural technologies do that?
The real drive towards technology, it's not the technology itself. We can all get wrapped up in something that's really exciting, but it's really the information that the technology can present to the farmer. So if we take an example, a project that I'm working on at the minute, it's very much focused on using technology to drive efficiency savings on farms. So if we look at beef carcasses that are meeting the slaughterhouse at the minute, I reckon about 50% of those are meeting our optimal market specifications. As you know, the problem with that is that the animals are being retained on farm too long. They're using resources that we don't necessarily need them to use, contributing to our greenhouse gas emissions, etc., etc. And also there's a financial issue with that in that farmers are receiving heavy price penalties for out-of-spec carcasses. So what we're trying to do is essentially deal with this issue on farm by using different types of technology. So, for example, the use of simple automatic weighers to give us information on how an animal's productivity, how it's performing, advanced 3D imaging, for example, to provide information on carcass value. And it's the information on value that's most important to the farmer, not necessarily technology itself. And various other technologies that look at different aspects of the production system, like feed intake, for example, or water intake. So the real benefit is the information that you generate and provide to the farmer, and the methodology in which you present that information that really should drive change, not necessarily the technology itself.
I'm trying hard not to laugh out loud when you mention 3D imaging there, because how well does it work with hairy coos?
Oh, well, we're over that. It has been a bit of an issue, I have to say. It's more of a problem in sheep than it is in cattle. That's not now a major problem. We've got advanced 3D camera systems that we can easily integrate into automatic weigh platforms on farm. And we've got some very, very, very smart computer vision scientists that can essentially deal with those sorts of issues from an image.
There's a lot of nascent technology at the moment, Robert. So if you're out there doing your job as an agricultural consultant, farmers must be saying to you, yeah, but which one should I use?
It's really hard because the thing as well, so working for SEC Consulting, we pride ourselves on being impartial, and that's our business model is built on being impartial. And then someone says, what one's the best one, or which one should I use? And it is a challenge. But what we can do, we sit down with the customer and look at what they actually need. And there's a lot of the technology that's there. There's some very, very complex stuff out there. And there's also some really simple stuff that's going to, often the simple stuff has the biggest impact on the business. So it's really about sitting around the kitchen table and having that meaningful discussion and saying, look, what are you looking for out of this? Because there's nothing worse than paying for, a subscription to a program, for example, that you're only going to use 10% of it. So it's all about meeting the needs or marrying up the needs of the customer and the facilities within that program or within that bit of technology. So, how much does that farmer actually need, and or how much are they going to use? And trying to marry up their expectations with a reasonable price tag as well. So it's great as well to have competition, because when there's competition in any market, it pushes people to be better. And that's why that's how ultimately we're going to make progress in this area, that as each bit of technology gets better than the one before it, the next one has to step up. So I think it's really quite exciting watching this all evolve. And for those people who don't, they don't want to invest until the best technologies out there. Back when we were living in caves, somebody somewhere got up and got out, and that's the thing. You need to kick on and do something. And yes, if you invest in something this year, the following year something will be better, but you'll have had a year's worth of benefit from it.
I spoke some months ago on this QMS podcast series, Caroline, to a research scientist in Canada who was doing some fascinating stuff with feed additives, which were able to reduce methane emissions. How are those, additives shaping up?
Yeah, I think this is actually quite an exciting area at the minute, and one that I think has been moving along quite fast in the past few years. And as you're probably familiar, we've actually got a nice research facility at SRUC that allows us to essentially measure methane emissions from cattle. So allows us to look in detail at some of these specific feed additives. I guess you can classify additives into two particular types. You've got your synthetic-based additives. For example, you'll probably be familiar with a product called 3-NOP. It's manufactured by a company called DSM. I think it's called Bovaer 10. But you also get your more natural-based additives. So for example, essential oils extracted from plants, or probably the one that's gained most interest in the last few months is potential to use seaweed in feeds. So the real thing about feed additives is that they really must be effective at reducing methane. They may have a potential benefit in terms of productivity, but they've also got to be safe to feed to animals and enter the food chain. So the three additives, I guess, that are gaining most interest at the minute really relate to our essential oils, our 3-NOP products, and seaweed.
Are you getting questions about that too when you're out and about, Robert?
Actually, in recent weeks, so there's been a big announcement that there's going to be methane inhibitors manufactured in Dalry and Ayrshire near home, so on our home patch. And that's really got people talking about what's it all about, what are they? And again, the exciting thing for me is that methane is a loss to it's a loss of energy from the system. So if we can reduce the level of methane being lost from the system, we can actually improve performance and improve feed conversion efficiency and ultimately reduce days alive, which will further reduce methane emissions as well. So it's interesting. Are we there yet? There's a lot of farmers asking, when's it coming? Is it going to be a thing? We've not had a lot of questions as to actually using it, but I do think, as Caroline says, it's moving very fast, and I think for next winter's rations, I think there'll be more questions about it, and it's a very much a developing market, which is nice to see the market stepping up and giving us some realistic options.
Caroline, you and your team are working on something at the moment called the Green Shed project. Can you tell me about it?
There's various options for reducing methane, but one of the things that we've been exploring over the past maybe 12 to 18 months is potential to capture methane directly and utilise that within the production system. So we've had some funding from Scottish Government and essentially BASE, the Greenhouse Gas Removal Programme, to essentially look at what a design might look like for a shed. So if we can capture methane from a shed and then utilise that methane within the production system, there's significant benefits to be gained in terms of reducing methane from that type of production system.
What would you use the methane for?
So you can use that to generate energy on farm and then use that energy that you've created to essentially run your farming business.
And is it looking promising?
Certainly is. So we're at the phase now. We've been doing some modelling work in collaboration with Strathclyde University, and the model's looking really good. So where we would like to be going in the next few years really is to build a demonstrator facility that demonstrates how that system would work.
How on earth would it work though? I mean, I've not got much farming experience at all, but I mean, I used to work in a dairy farm years ago, and I know that one of the things that really damages cattle during the wintertime is a lack of ventilation. So if you're going to have a sealed unit in the form of a green shed, how do you get ventilation and capture the methane at the same time?
Yeah, so essentially it's not a sealed system. So I don't want anyone to think that we're generating this sealed shed. It's a mechanically ventilated shed. So when cattle would be housed, or normally housed, we're not bringing cattle in from the hills. We would then essentially mechanically ventilate that shed, optimize the environment for the animals, optimize their health, optimize their welfare, optimize their productivity. So everything about controlling the environment should pay dividends in terms of animal production, but also allow us as an add-on to be able to capture that methane and then generate something useful with it. Ideally, essentially reducing the carbon footprint of that business.
You can end up with a two-tier system with this, do you reckon, Robert? Because, again, looking at it, thinking, right, you've got these animals in a shed, and it's a controlled system, and, you can show scientifically a very clear benefit there. You've also got animals out in the hill that are eating pasture land that would be no use for anything else. So, how do you compare that apple and that orange?
What you've hit on there, Mark, is a really important point, is that Scotland's a hugely diverse country, and we've got really good land in some areas, and really, very much biodiverse, species rich land elsewhere in the country. And there's a role for the ruminant across the whole country, but the role of the cow changes. In some areas it's very much about food production, and in other areas it's about the wider public goods and the wider ecosystem services that we deliver. So it's not going to be a two-tiered system, it's going to be a multi-tiered system. That this certainly will have may have a role to play. We've got a principle to prove, really, but this will have a role for some, but certainly won't be the be-all and end-all. And I think it's really important at this stage to acknowledge all the good that a suckler cow, particularly a suckler cow, does, but ruminants in general. We mentioned the level of emissions, or the impact that those emissions have in terms of the UK targets, but we also have the management of soils, management of grasslands, and the sequestration of carbon to discuss as well. So for me, there's a really bright, positive future for the ruminant in Scotland as part of a drive towards net zero.
From a farmer's perspective, what do you think is achievable in terms of short-term, long-term gains?
There's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there, and the one, for me, EID is so important. And cattle have an identity already. They've got a passport, and they've got a very cumbersome way of identifying them officially. The move towards EID, for me, the sooner we get to EID and a system of EID that's accepted by Scottish Government, the sooner we'll actually get people heavily investing in the system going forward. At the moment, there's a bit of doubt whether it's going to be low frequency or ultra high frequency, and when that's the case, people are reluctant to jump in and spend a lot of money on the various bits of kit that Caroline has described, based on maybe getting the wrong one. And that's something that we all need to shout about the need for it, and push for government to make a call on that one. But certainly in the short term, there's a huge amount of efficiency savings to be made, and at this stage we can have that focus on money that I was speaking about earlier on. We can look at developing sustainable businesses, and then as a byproduct of that, we'll have lower emissions. I'm a big believer that the market always responds when there's a big need for something to happen. The market responds. What we know is that globally there's a huge demand for beef, and there's a huge demand for beef produced from natural systems. And with that being the case, there's a huge market to actually deal with these issues. So I think down the line we'll have a much more at our disposal to develop a truly low carbon, environmentally sensitive beef system.
Caroline, there's no question of the fact the market is responding. There's ideas coming right, left and centre at the moment. How exciting a time is this? You said you've been doing it for 10 years, to be actually working in this research field.
Oh, I think it's a really exciting area. Over the past 10 years, methane's gained momentum, and then it's lost momentum, and then it's gained momentum. But actually, we're starting to see a lot more industry investment in trying to generate solutions that are really applicable to your commercial farm. So for me, that's the key benefit, and one of the key exciting areas. I do a lot of work that's industry led, working with commercial companies that can essentially develop a system that can get to market with a real aim on focusing on a specific challenge, whether that's around disease detection or productivity benefits, or directly around methane. So there's lots and lots of interest, and it's a really exciting area.
How important do you think it is for the red meat industry to interact with politicians, with civil servants, with the media, that kind of thing?
I think it's absolutely vital. I think it's never been more important. And we now have I was going to say a well-read, we've got a consumer who knows a little about a lot, and we've got a social media and basically very condensed messages getting out to people. And for me, lying to our consumers is a major problem. That's something we really cannot afford to do. In any industry, you can't afford to do that. But at this stage, we need to be out there with facts and telling, showing farmers, or showing consumers, sorry, what the problem is and what we're trying to do. And for that, I think I would highlight the television has been really, I've spent quite a long time trying not to throw things at the television, watching various adverts and things, but the worm's turning quietly. And I saw the McDonald's advert recently, and McDonald's are basically have said they are supporting UK agriculture by buying British to allow farmers to make the investments they need to become or for a sustainable future. And I think that's a wonderful message, and one that we really should be shouting from the rooftops. And as far as engaging with politicians, very, very important, and policymakers, we need to get our point across to them, but it must be fact-based. It can't just be roughly what we want them to hear. It has to be based on fact.
I agree with Robert there. It's really, really very important for us to get the key facts out there, key messages around where we can generate these benefits across the supply chain, not to an individual farm level, but across the supply chain, and absolutely essential to engage with politicians.
You obviously both feel it's important for farmers to have the facts, to have the information. Where did he get that, Robert?
Yeah, so there's a lot of information out there, and there's obviously plenty of options just starting on Google. But for me, the place to, as I said before, we want facts, we want the correct information, and for me the best place to go for that is the Farming for a Better Climate website. So Farming for a Better Climate is a Scottish Government funded programme which we've been very involved with, and basically it's all about key messages and hints and tips, things that farmers can do to make a positive difference. And there's everything on there, from reducing methane in cattle right through to renewable heat options. And there's a whole swathe of material there, and really well worth a visit, hence the shameless plug.
Quite right too. Now, and Caroline, the work that you do, are you just speaking to other scientists, or the research, is it condensed in any way into bite-sized chunks that people could use?
It certainly is. If you can actually go onto our SRUC webpage. We've got a new webpage. It's much easier to navigate now, and you'll see whole rafts of different research centres with some important information on project-specific detail if you go onto the website.
And I think it's worth flinging in there as well that we are part, or a lot of my role is as an extension service as well, to extend those research messages from Caroline out to the field. So our consultants and advisors out there are all, and also crucially lecturers are out there extending those messages and working with the cutting edge information that Caroline's given us.
Would this have been happening 10 years ago, Caroline? This degree of cooperation?
I think we've always been quite good between ourselves. I think that's the benefit of the structure of SRUC, and that we've got that extension service through our consultancy arm. So we've always been very good at interacting with our consultants and trying to get that message out to farm. I don't know how you feel about that, Robert.
I think there's maybe never been a bigger need.
Yep.
So it's a united front we need at the moment. It's not a fight for survival, but it's a fight to get our message out there and make sure that our positive industry is seen for all the good that it does. It's not about SRUC, SAC, QMS, NFU. It's all these bodies cooperating and working together. So I think with that need, we certainly are. We probably are working a bit closer together, but we've had the model for some time as to how to do that, and it's really quite exciting to see the positives, to see it really getting going, and certainly bringing in these other organisations which have got a huge amount to give as well.
Caroline Duthie and Robert Ramsey, thank you both very much for your time.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
I hope, listening to this, you found it useful too. Next week, I'm going to be talking to the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and Islands, Marie Goujon, to get her take on how she felt COP26 went and what the Scottish red meat industry can do going forwards. Until the next time, I'm Mark Stephen. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. For news and to listen back to previous episodes of the podcast, visit qmscotland.co.uk. For Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork recipe videos and inspiration, visit www.scotchkitchen.com or follow Scotch Kitchen on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter.